I'm sitting here in Amsterdam with Dr. Sage Goodwin. And when you hear the name Dr. Goodwin, you may think of Dr. Michelle Goodwin, who's a frequent guest on MSNBC and other news channels that are both national and global. And this is the daughter of Dr. Michelle Goodwin. And having followed uh, your academic career since high school in Beijing, bachelor's and master's at Stanford University. And would you tell us why you chose Twente University in Enschede, the Netherlands, for your PhD?
Yes. First, thank you for bringing me on to your podcast. I'm
Oh,
very excited for the future of it and
oh, thank
seeing
you.
who
Thank
all
you.
joins.
Mm,
Um, so I ended up coming to the Netherlands and specifically University of Twente, mainly because of the project itself. So at Stanford, I studied computer science undergrad, and then I was kind of disappointed by
mm,
basically how tech was taught and interpreted in the Bay Area in terms
mm-hmm,
that there's so much wealth accumulated, yet you
mm-hmm,
have an abundance of homelessness and people living on the street. And when I was living in that area, I just thought it was kind of sad how we're approaching technology. So then my master's was more in philosophy and corporate social responsibility. Um,
mm, mm,
and
mm,
then I was at a conference, and a professor told me you should really do a PhD. And they told me about the position, and the position was specifically working with this 3D printed bridge that would be installed in Amsterdam,
mm,
and working on sort of the philosophy of cityness and smart cities,
mm-hmm.
and also doing machine learning with the bridge.
I see.
In
Mm-hmm,
the end, the bridge took so long to be placed, and
mm-hmm,
we ran into different issues along the way that doing the more technical part of the project didn't make as much sense. And so
mm-hmm.
I really dove further into the philosophy of technology aspects.
Okay, wow, thank you so much for that. Say, by the way, this is a copy of her dissertation, Bridging the Gap Between Humans and Their Infrastructure. And that's Dr. Sage Goodwin. Okay, I'd also like to give Sage a copy of a couple of books I recently published, and that is poems by Professor Daniel Kunene, a professor from South Africa, who happened to be my wife's father, my late wife's father, and also this book about his life, which is a biography of his life. And he has also he published 16 books in his life, and he was in exile from South Africa for over 30 years. And so this is the story of his life as told by him. It's a transcription primarily of interviews that he did with the University of Wisconsin Oral History Society, and also letters and other private material that I found doing research on his life. So I want to present those to Dr. Goodwin.
Thank
All right.
you.
Yes, yes. And I'd like
Oh.
to ask a few questions, if you don't
Mhm.
mind, Dr. Goodwin. Sage, if I may call you Sage.
Yes, please do.
Sage, at the center of your unique research design is the MX3D bridge, the world's first 3D stainless steel bridge. That says a lot right there. The world's first bridge printed by robots installed in Amsterdam. What to you is the significance of this technological advancement?
Um, so I think for me, the most exciting aspect of the 3D printed bridge is the options for not mass development of products, but to sort of test. So what MX3D's biggest business at the moment is
Mhm,
if you have a manufacturer that's trying to decide what sort of joint they need or what sort of um,
mhm,
instrument they need placed, you can test a lot of prototypes without having to create a machine or a mold of a specific part. So it's very nice when you're thinking about sustainability and prototyping and things like that, because
mm,
you don't need to create a whole center to develop something new. Uh, if you want to produce a lot of something, then it would be a little bit more difficult at the moment to 3D print with these robots because
I
the
see.
technology is quite expensive. But when you're in that testing phase and prototyping phase, it's a
Mhm.
nice tool to have.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll delve deeper into some of these issues if we
Mhm.
possibly can. As of 2022, 56% of the world lives in cities, and 68% is predicted to live in cities by 2050, according to
Mhm.
your research. And in addition to street lights, electrical grids, or footbridges, what new infrastructure do you envision affecting their lives and the potential social and or political consequences of an uninformed public?
Yes, so I think some of the biggest questions that we have in terms of how cities will develop include transportation, I think, is one of the largest
Mhm,
ones, especially if you have people moving away from what their
mhm,
prior home region
mhm,
was. And when
mhm,
we think about the future of work and people working from home or working somewhere else,
mhm,
really figuring out that, and do we want to um, prioritize our roadways? Do we want to prioritize bike paths? Do we want to
mm,
prioritize
mhm,
walking? And each of
mm,
those decisions will have a big impact on how people move through the world and spaces. And especially when you think about people of different disabilities or
mm,
abilities, ages, those choices that you make will have a big impact on how the city develops and how people utilize space. So I
mm,
think that's one big one. And then the other one goes in the direction of, um, yeah, how do you want to sort of run your city or government? So if you go the more democracy driven or capitalist driven, we're having more AI embedded into our infrastructure and the
mhm,
decision making of a city. So, yeah, how is that used? Are we going to optimize the city for each individual? So you shape um, the way the city will look like to you, for example, will be different than for me because the city will
mhm,
recognize you and then make choices for you. And there might be good and bad things about having
mhm,
something like that in the
mhm.
city.
Wow, I get the sense that you've thought about this a bit.
Yes, some. A
I
little
get
bit.
that. I get that sense a little bit. By the way, this is our first podcast from Straight to the Point, which you'll see our logo on my cap here. So we're trying to market or promote at the same time that we're beginning our podcast series. Okay, so let's continue here with question number 3. How might contemporary surveillance technologies and practices affect different groups? For example, immigrants, sex workers, racial and ethnic groups. Racializing surveillance, for example. You note, for example, how smart cities have been used to undermine the power of minority groups. Again, that's from your
Mhm.
dissertation. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we think of, so if you were to consider surveillance just the act of sort of collecting data, then we have to decide what we do with that data and who has access to it. So if we think about sort of we want safety approach from a government, how do you determine that? What looks to you like a criminal? Who are we going to criminalize in a space? So, for example,
Wow.
in the Netherlands, well, in a lot of countries, there
Hmm.
are cameras on roadways and stuff, and you can track by license plate where cars are coming from, and you can see the model of the car, and there are
Hmm.
kind of statistics that, okay, cars from certain parts of Europe, those are more likely to be trafficking drugs in, and if it's an older, so that's already built into city
Wow.
systems. And so if you can take that example and
Hmm.
kind of place it in a lot of different
Different,
sort of,
yeah,
yeah,
context. Yeah.
instances and
Mm-hmm.
context. So are you going to, even if you don't, people are really worried about de-anonymization, but even if you're not, even if you are anonymous, so let's say I don't know that it's Fritz Pointer, but I
Mm-hmm.
know that it's yeah, a black man in the city,
Mm-hmm.
and then I advertise or I make decisions specifically based on that profile of you, not knowing other elements of you. So, what elements, what data points are we going to put in for each individual in the city? And if you make choices based on that, there could be problems that arise because people, of course, aren't just data points. So,
Wow,
yeah.
wow, wow. That is really, really interesting. I mean, I get
Mm-hmm.
stopped in just hearing you talk
Mm-hmm.
about the complexity of this topic.